Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
Yeah, so where are you from originally?
I was born in London,
yeah.
A London boy, North London. My dad was Irish. He came to this country in sort of like just before the war. Met my mum here, and they married him. So I was born here.
And stayed.
Indeed, actually, kind of. It sounds terrible in a way, doesn't it? If you've got to go, you're born in London. There's not a lot of reason to go, because it so much actually happens here. I did spend 2.5 years in New York when we opened BBH in New York, which was great fun. I loved that. That was fantastic. But I knew I couldn't stay. I mean, the brief was basically go over, set the agency up, get it established, and then leave it to the people we had hired to run it. And you don't really want founders hanging about telling them what to do and what not to do. So I got there and we opened just at the end of... I sort of say we started really in 99, the beginning of 99. And I flew from London to New York in early January 99. And it was like getting on a kind of time machine, because London then, the whole internet and what was going to happen was being talked about. I landed in New York 7 hours later, and it's as though I've accelerated 2 years into the future. Literally everything was .com.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. You couldn't have a conversation without saying digital in the first 30 seconds. It was unbelievable, and there was this explosion of kind of so-called opportunity and what the internet was going to do and how it was going to transform everything and blah blah blah. And of course, it all came horribly crashing down as it was oversold. But then, latterly has obviously come back. But it was very interesting, fabulous time to be working in New York. I mean, it was never known before. People beating our doors down to get us to work on their new .com business, and they were throwing money around like it's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we were rightfully suspect of quite a number of the ideas and didn't want to get involved. And of course, when it came crashing down, it took a lot of young agencies with them.
Why was that? Did it strike you as a fact?
Well, because I think the agencies had all staffed on the basis that all these companies were coming in, they were growing, there was that. And then, when it collapsed, it was overnight. There was blood on the streets. Literally people were walking wounded. And I think it destabilised a lot of companies, and they just withdrew from the market. Yeah. So a really tough time. It wasn't a slow decline in any way at all. I've always had that view of things that go up fast, come down fast. There's a sort of fundamentalist kind of attitude to that. And I think having one of the things of having been around for so long, you get to have seen so many different things. Great phrases at that time was, "Hey, we're working on internet time," and you don't get it, and this is the new, and phrases like that, and you're thinking, oh, I really do get it, and no, this isn't the new, and certain things will apply, like, what is the idea? Do people want it? Can we make people want it?
Yes.
All those sort of simple questions that perhaps you should be asking were not being asked.
Yeah, and were you from a creative family? Were there any direct links, any parents creative?
No, not at all. I always put down. I mean, I think creative people are great observers. It's something I always say to them when I see my creative people at the agency walking around with headphones on and stuff like that, and I know I'm going to sound like some old fart, but I really don't mean it to be that. But essentially, you're cutting yourself off. Inspiration is all around you, and you have to keep feeding that creative soul so that you've got something that comes back out again. And I think I was very lucky in that, as I said, my father was Irish, and so I was born into a slightly Irish household, but I was living in North London, and so I would observe that, and then I would have my friends who were friends, neighbours, whatever they might be, and I'd be able to observe that. And I had, from a very early age, I was able to see that there were differences or certain things that were done differently and people behaved in a slightly different way. And I think that was a great advantage. And as I say, I do think great creative people are observers. They watch, they listen.
I couldn't agree more.
And having that sort of sparked in me from a very early age, just seeing differences and observing, well, why do they do it like that and they do it like this, or whatever it might be, helped enormously, I think, in watching and listening and being able to see how that could be funny or that wasn't, and of course there was that lovely use of language, Irish use of language, which was brilliant. Although I became an art director, but I can always remember we had a lovely old aunt who was from Cork who came to live with us. She was the most wonderful woman. She was a genuine saint, but she would have these great little sayings like, life's not worth living once you're dead. Yeah. I was once going to give a talk on showing my work and showing how incidents that had happened to me, overheard conversations, had actually gone into my work, and it was quite significant. And I was going to do a little presentation on it with some of the things that I've done. And so much of yourself obviously goes into your work. Well, that's kind of leads us to that wonderful thing I talk about, which is the definition of creativity. What is the definition of creativity? Now, there are many, and I think a friend said to me many, many years ago, a long time ago, he said, music is the greatest of all art forms. And I said, I don't think it is actually. I think it's the second greatest of all art forms. I think life is the greatest of all art forms. Therefore, you could define creativity, or therefore we're all creative. This idea that, I'm often in meetings where people say to me, oh, John, you're creative, so you make the decision. And I always say to them, well, look, we're all creative. It's just that I'm earning my living by it. But that sense of then defining creativity. So then if you believe life is the greatest of all art forms, then you could define creativity as an expression of self. Mm-hmm. And I think all my work really evolves from that belief that is the definition of creativity. Mm-hmm. And as I say when I'm talking about this to students by and large, because I often give talks to students, therefore, and I don't care whether you're designing a swing ticket or you're writing a movie script or whether you're designing a building, you kind of go into it. It is an expression of you. And I think that's very, very important. And if you hear great artists talking about their work, and I'm not talking about advertising people, I'm talking about, a movie maker or a painter or a writer, or something. They talk about what they were trying to say, what they were trying to express. And I think even in your own commercial work, that is true as well.
I'm a complete proponent of that, and I think it's so true.
Yeah.
And for that reason, the same thing when I talk to students, I tell them to don't look around and become overwhelmed with the sheer amount of creative talent. Just always remember that there can only be one you with that unique journey. And I think nail on the head what you said.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that, and it goes down to the work you produce. I always say, people often say to you, oh, obviously you're really good at standing in the shoes of the consumer. And I say, no, I'm not. I've got no bloody idea how to stand in the shoes of the consumer. I'm not even sure I want to stand in the shoes of the consumer. But I do what I love.
Yeah.
And obviously I do it with a kind of understanding of where it's going to run, who it's going to talk to, naturally. But in the end, I do what I love. And if I'm lucky, what I love resonates with other people, just as you are if you're a novelist or a filmmaker or a painter, you know.
Yeah.
You know, a filmmaker doesn't get a brief,
No.
you know, and go, I want you to make a movie that's going to do this and talk to 18 to 24-year-olds or whatever it might be. They go and say, I'd like to make a movie about this issue, you know, and it will have a youth-orientated feel to it, or it might, you know, or it might be a bit more sophisticated, or whatever, however you want to define it. But basically, you're making what you want to make.
Yeah. Was there a conscious point when you mentioned the observational upbringing and recognising traits of Irish people in your family? Was there a point when you felt like this was an industry you wanted to go in, that you recognised the way you absorbed that might shape the path you took professionally?
No, not really. I didn't. I was, I've always said I was one of the lucky generation. We came out of, I was born in 1944, so I was essentially a post-war kind of child, where opportunity was opening up, education was opening up. I was able to go to art school at the age of 14. You could go to Saturday morning art school. And I always liked the idea of it. I always thought being an artist was pretty cool. I don't know why. I'm just but I just thought the idea of an artistic kind of existence was really interesting. And going to art school at that age was just brilliant, because I could do it on a Saturday morning, and I got that real flavour and sense of, what it offered up. And I think the other thing too that happens to you is you look at the people around you and you think, God, they're interesting. They're fantastic. This is really good. So through being able to do that, I went on into art school. But fortunately, or unfortunately, was told that I probably wasn't going to be the next Picasso. As I say, by the time I was 16, it was something of a disappointment, because I was then aware of the number of women that he was able to liaise with. But I loved ideas, and I was advised to go to design school. So I went and studied graphic design. And I was at Hornsey, and then I went to the London School of Printing and studied printing there, and design and graphic design. And because I loved ideas, it was the thing that really turned me on. I then met there this wonderful, wonderful man called John Gillard, who showed me the work of Dordain Bernbach, which was then, we're talking mid-60s, and of course it was at its peak. And I looked at this work for Volkswagen and Avis and all those famous campaigns, and Levi's Jewish bread and things like that, and I just thought, this is what I want to do, And it was about ideas, but it was witty, smart, but it was inclusive. It didn't exclude, it included, and I thought that was terrific. So it was whilst I was at the London College of Printing that I realised advertising was something I'd love to go into. I always think it's funny, isn't it? You're surrounded by something, but you don't see it.
Yes.
It's kind of... although having said that, I can always remember, people say to me, what was the very first ad you ever remember? And I remember, actually, I must have been about 7 or 8, and there was this poster for Guinness, and it said, "Down with Guinness." And I went to my dad and I said, I don't understand, there's a poster on it telling you not to drink Guinness. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it says "Down with Guinness." And he said, it's a joke, get it, down, drink down. And I thought, right. So maybe that sort of at that age, something had gone in. But I didn't then go, I'd like to go into that business.
No. Well, I don't think... I struggled to meet anyone that ever did. Yeah. Everyone always says, did you always want to be an illustrator? No, it was the same thing as you. I was attracted to the idea of interesting people, interesting conversation. And you do just, at some point, if we're fortunate enough, we meet those right mentors.
Yeah,
push us in the right direction, which is what... people said to me, why are you trying to draw in typography modules? I said, because I want to draw. Yeah. And they said, go to illustration, and I did, and that was it. That was the big turning point, And
it's lovely that. It's lovely getting those, and I feel very sorry for people who don't get that moment in their life when they're kind of turned onto something, and it just connects. It really does connect. And then, of course, you've got to find, then you've got, are you good at it?
Yes.
Because even though you appreciate it, I mean, listen, I love tennis. I mean, I adore tennis, but there is absolutely no way ever that I'm going to play at Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Never was and never will be. You know. But so being enthusiastic about something doesn't mean to say you're necessarily going to be good at it.
No.
But without being enthusiastic, you won't be great at something.
Were you attracted to the capacity within advertising to work with many disciplines in terms of photography and artwork without necessarily needing to be good at them?
I didn't really think about it like that. I just thought you were kind of working in this profession where they loved ideas. They didn't necessarily love your ideas, of course. Yeah. That was the other thing you find out. But I think that when one got into it, you then realise that you'd be working with photographers and illustrators and filmmakers and editors and all those wonderful people. It made it more and more interesting. And as I say, I came into the industry in the mid-'60s. And it was actually in many ways, it was quite a dull industry. The 60s, the swinging 60s, hadn't quite happened in advertising. It didn't really happen in advertising until the 70s, because large corporations really controlled advertising in the sense that they bought what it was producing. And getting them to understand that there was a whole new generation out there talking, thinking, being in a different way was not something that they were very open to. Whereas, in the 60s, music, fashion, art, filmmaking had all responded to this new youth culture that was appearing.
So what was your entry point?
Well, in those days, you went in as what they called a junior art director, because you wouldn't be trusted with being able to go and do a job on your own. You had to be a junior art director and learn about all kinds of things, like different, I'm saying things here now which people would think, what on earth is he talking about? But with printing, with different screens and different things like that, you had to know. 65 screen was black and white newspapers. 135 screen was, colour magazines, and taking pictures for that, making sure they reproduced in those different magazines and newspapers was crucially important. That's how I got into it.
And did you harbour ambitions of working up, or was it an organic path to kind of...
I really didn't. My ambition was to do great work. I've always let the work do the talking.
Gives me great encouragement to hear that.
We always say at BBH, all roads lead to the work. Great work solves everything. But also I had a kind of philosophy of people say, do you have a 5-year plan? And I go, no, I have a 5-minute plan. And I think the idea of, saying I want to have my own agency is a kind of slight nonsense, really, because, there you are at the age of 23. Well, by the time you've got enough experience under your belt to maybe open an agency, maybe agencies aren't the thing anymore. Living in the absolute now is something I think great creative people do. I think they have that maintain and hold on to that sort of childish kind of, I'm going to enjoy now, I'm going to create for now, I'm going to do something for this moment, because this moment is the most important moment. Is absolutely crucial.
You mentioned about the zero control of when you were born, but actually the time when you were born being very important for your, of course, for your journey. And in today's fast-paced world, how big a part of creativity do you feel that is, responding to the moment and to where things go fast?
Oh, I think it's the only answer. I think it is the only way of doing everything. I mean, people often say to me, "Oh, John, what do you think the future's going to hold? What's it going to be like? You've been in the agency for so long." And I say, I have no idea. I will not make predictions. The only prediction I will make, and the only thing I can control, is that if I make this idea truly brilliant, it will give me another. I'll get the chance to do another idea tomorrow.
Yes.
And that's all you can do. And again, because I've been around for so long, I've heard so many predictions that have become so. When you look back at them now, you think, well, that was completely stupid. Like some guy who was running one of the big internet companies saying, in sort of 98 or something like that, television will all be over by, within 10 years. It's a great prediction. You know who you are. Do you remember making that prediction? I won't say who it was. I think it was something to do with Yahoo. And we also live in this age of, big data, where people say we're going to be able to predict how people are going to behave and what they're going to do and stuff like that. And I go, well, if you believe that, if you've drunk that Kool-Aid, then God bless you. The one prediction I will make, and that the future is going to be creative. And that since I came into this industry, that has grown and grown and grown. That the power of creativity is something that is being increasingly understood, despite the fact that I think our industry at the moment is not particularly good at developing great creative work. But I think that's a sort of, in the sort of fullness of time, that's a kind of, maybe slightly more than a blip, but we will regain the kind of need to produce outstanding work and engage with our audience and entertain them and involve them and do all those things that great communication is about.
Do you feel there's a lack of risk taking in today's industry?
I think there is. I think there's a lack of individuals in our industry today. And again, please, I really, really am not that old bloke saying, "Oh, back when I was doing." But I think we had more renegades. We had more people who were trying to challenge the status quo. And I think today what we have is are people who are technologically literate, but not communication wise.
Yes.
And technology is absolutely important, fundamental. I mean, I always say technology enables opportunity, but it's creativity that creates value. And I think we've sort of got that slightly confused, where people do think that the idea is in some way using a bit of technology. Not, it's an idea and this is the best way to use that technology. There's a sort of, the balance is slightly wrong. But fundamentally, I think we will get back to it, because in the end, people want it. And I don't see architects going, "Oh, it's just too difficult now. I mean, too many buildings going up. You can't stand. Nothing stands out anymore. People aren't interested." No, they've employed even more creativity, more kind of building structures which are really distinctive and involving. Television doesn't go, "That's it. Nobody's watching television, so there's no point writing great stuff." No, they've gone out and employed even more creativity, and lo and behold, what's happening?
It's a real golden age.
It's a golden age for television, Mr. Yahoo. And I think we've lost our faith in creativity, because we've stood back and we're in awe of the technology. The technology's great, I love it, but actually we're delivering a message. How can I make that interesting and distinctive and memorable? We end up kind of misunderstanding in our industry persuasion and promotion. So, what we're in is a world where technology can promote, because I can talk one-to-one to people. And they forget that actually you've got to persuade as well. And persuasion is the great art of advertising. I am, a persuader. There's nothing, and persuasion is great. Persuasion is very good. I mean, virtually every conversation you have in some way or another is employing persuasion. If you talk about your favourite football team with your best friend, you're kind of going, "No, I think my team's much better." But this, you're trying to persuade them. We shouldn't stand back from that. It's a very, very powerful and meaningful force, as long as it's carried out with integrity and openness and all of the things that it should do, and it isn't divisive.
Yeah.
So I'm a great believer that we will kind of, our industry, the communications industry, will kind of come back to kind of a greater employment of creativity, and not be sort of awed by the complexity of what's out there. A great simple idea breaks through. It does break through, and that's the task of our industry. That's what we are good at doing, and that's what we should get back to doing in some way or another.
Did you, famously, you've worked on a lot of groundbreaking campaigns over the years, and did you How did you deal with resistance? Did you often have to fight to get your ideas over the line?
I think you do. I think there's no, the idea that you sit there and kind of, people willingly take every scrap of paper off your drawing board and rush it to the client to say, this is genius. I think you have to fight for what you believe in. I think, first of all, you fight for the right to work on the accounts that you like and want to work on. There's an element of that. And you find yourself kind of being drawn towards certain things because of your belief. Go back to my thing about creativity as an expression of self. I'd like to work on that. But I've never excluded things. I've never kind of gone, people have always said to me, what's the account you most want to work on? Thinking you're going to say something like, Nike or Levi's or, Ferrari or something like that. I've said, really, the account I really want to work on is the account that wants to change the way that industry is seen or believed in. So if somebody came to me and said, I manufacture nuts and bolts, but I want to change the way people feel about nuts and bolts because they hold the world together, whatever, that's the account I want to work on.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. You want to work on things where people want to make a change. That's what's exciting. Mm-hmm. But you've got to kind of surround yourself then with people who want to do the kind of things you want to do. And I was very lucky with John Bartlett and Nigel Bogle, in that we had come together in '73 in running the London office of TBWA and realised we had a great respect for each other and kind of wanted to do this same sort of work. John was a planner, Nigel was an account man, I was the creative guy, and we all sort of loved the same work. It'd be like being in a band and somebody wants it to be a rock and roll band and somebody else comes in and says, no, I'd like to do a bit of country music or something. And you go, well, yes, that's not what we do, we're a rock and roll band. So you've got to have people around you who believe in similar things to you. It doesn't mean say you agree on everything, because that would be rather boring. But you actually believe in the sort of the ethics and the same things as each other. Mm. And then you can have a constructive relationship. But you've still got to, within that, you're still going to have to fight for individual pieces and people doubting what you're doing. I remember when we sort of got the brief to sort of change the Levi's hero, and we were sort of talking about, well, maybe it should be about a relationship now rather than just a single person, looking cool and groovy and all those cliches. And we were sort of looking at relationships, and I thought they all looked pretty boring to me. And I sort of came up with the idea of using this yellow puppet that became Flat Eric, and at that time everybody thought I had gone mad. John, are you sure? This is Levi's. I said, no, this will be great. So you have to have faith in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you don't, and that's one of the great difficulties I think about following a creative career, is this thing of holding on to kind of your confidence. You've got to be fearless, because you're not trying to recreate what you've done before. Especially in our industry, you've got to come in every day and have a new idea, and that idea can't be like yesterday's idea. Yeah. So it's a really relentlessly creative environment you're in. I think in terms of strategy, for instance, when we launched Boddington's down here in the south, and Boddington's was a Manchester beer, thick, creamy head. And down in the south, when we were launching it down here, people in the south of England don't like beer with thick, creamy heads, but Boddington's did. So instead of actually saying, "Oh, let's ignore that," no, let's turn it into a kind of an opportunity, and we created the name, the Boddington's Cream of Manchester, and we actually focused on the creaminess of it, and actually it worked. It worked hugely well. I suppose you could look at Vorsprung durch technique. There's kind of It was a German car. We were very proud of the fact that it was a German car. Most people didn't know Audi was a German car. They thought it was made in, this is back in the early 80s, they thought it was made in somewhere like Belgium or somewhere like that. So we had this, which came from the factory, the slogan Vorsprung durch Technik. And what, some people, research said don't do it, whatever you do, because it's emphasising its Germanness. And we said, no, we are German. Well, we're going to make use of that. I always think actually a lot of advertising a lot of communication is confronting what seems to be a problem,
yes,
and turning that problem into an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Volkswagen famously did that. It's ugly, but it works.
Yeah. Well, I just have huge admiration for the balls to run with the German and trust the beautiful phonetics of that statement.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. But do you think we can ever fully break the mentality that creativity is not just playing around? And I'm talking in terms of governments and parents and the people that provide resistance to, let's say, children who, the reason we sort of drop that innocence of play at a young age when we get into education. Do you think we can ever fully break that, or do you think maybe it doesn't need to be broken?
Well, when I went to art school, really was seen as, well, I suppose we ought to let a few people go to art school. They might end up painting a nice picture, and culture is vaguely important, so let's let them do that. I do think over the last, 50-odd years, people have become more aware of the value of a creative education. And I think the sort of funny thing, the bizarre thing is, I think the downside of that is they're trying to constrain it much more. They're trying to control it. Oh, therefore, it is kind of wonderful. Therefore, now how can we control it more?
Yeah.
As opposed to, in a sense, going, that's great, liberate it. Keep liberating it. And that's my only fear. You then get, past ministers of education like Gove who create a curriculum and creativity isn't on it. And despite the fact that, the Minister of Trade is saying, the creative industries are now, 10% of our economy, and then down the table in the cabinet, you've got the Minister of Education going, and we're going to take creativity out of the curriculum. You just think, do these people ever talk to each other? Do they ever actually meet? You just said that. You don't have to be a genius to go, these two things are not reconciling themselves. Yeah. But I sort of go, my worry today about the creative education is that we are trying to formalise it much more. Today, when I went to art school, you didn't have to have 5 O levels or 2 A levels or whatever it is, or whereas now you've got to have a formal education before you can get into art school. Yeah. And I do think that's in danger of excluding people who think completely differently, which is the wonderful thing that creativity is there to encourage. And I think that's a great tragedy. That's a great tragedy. I never dwell on what's wrong. What's the point? There's so much that's wrong out there. My thing is dwell on positivity, dwell on what's right, and spend your time surrounding yourself with that. And I think in that, my love is the fact that creativity is now a far more democratized industry, in the sense that more and more people feel they can do it, and that gives me great excitement for the future. Hate is a negative word.
John, that's been wonderful, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Lovely chatting to you.